South Park Snow Day didn't just miss the mark as a co-op game, it let the entire South Park franchise down. For nearly a decade, South Park games were the gold standard. These weren't lazy licensed cash grabs, they were full RPGs that let us actually live in South Park. Whether it was fighting elves in the Stick of Truth or going head to head with Mitch Connor in the Fractured Butthole, those games did an incredible job of making us feel like real residents of this wacky little mountain town. That was until South Park Snow Day, a modern day game that feels like a cheap asset flip compared to the Stick of Truth and the Fractured Butthole. But is South Park Snow Day actually a bad game, or did we just expect too much out of it? Welcome to Deep Dive Gaming. And in today's video, we are going to find out why South Park Snow Day failed. South Park Snow Day lacked one major feature that the Stick of Truth and the Fractured Butthole had. Admittedly, it's the thing that made those games great, and that was blurring the lines between show and video games. When you picked up the previous games, you actually felt like you were participating in the show. The gloves off humor was there, so much so that certain scenes in the games got banned in some countries. I'm looking at you, Australia. It was like this because Matt Stone and Trey Parker were deeply involved with the development process of the games, with the duo writing the first draft of the scripts and requesting changes to certain mechanics to make sure that the games felt like an episode of South Park. The idea they had to make the games feel like seasons worked even better considering that they were based off of previous episodes of the show. Stick of Truth was based on the Black Friday trilogy, while the Fractured Butthole was based on the episode franchise prequel. But it seems that South Park Snow Day wasn't able to replicate the success of the previous games in more ways than just one. Snow Day isn't a 2D RPG like the Stick of Truth or the Fractured Butthole. Instead, it is a 3D roguelike beat-em-up that sees you just mashing a button over and over again. The humor that made the other games great was absent, and the voice acting was just horrendous. I mean, just listen to Henrietta from the Fractured Butthole compared to her character in South Park Snow Day.
Last time, I'm not a fucking vamp kid.
Well, what's the difference?
What's the difference? Look at us. I'm smoking a cigarette?
We have a common enemy. Join us. Help us fight the Vamp Kids.
Whatever, but I'm not wearing one of those costumes.
Hey, Jimmy asked for my help with your, game or whatever. These are dark ritual cards. They can manifest power beyond the mundane. But some of them come at a price. It's up to you what you're willing to sacrifice for wealth and power. Anyway, go ahead and, pick one.
But despite the game missing a lot of beats that the show is known for, its most outrageous blasphemy is that it doesn't look like South Park. Whoever thought that this look was going to go over well must have been cheesing their brains out, because there is no way in hell Matt and Trey thought that fans would be fine with this. Making the switch from RPG to a beat-em-up is controversial enough, but making a South Park game that doesn't look like South Park, well, you know what? You get a first-class ticket to hell for that. I understand that they had to go the 3D route in order to make the game they wanted, but going for the semi-realistic look just wasn't a good idea. They could have used cel-shaded graphics and that would have made the game look more like the show while leaving the 3D look intact. Snow Day starts by actually giving us this classic look. Leanne is watching a news segment about a truck that happened to crash. All the while, a blizzard is raging outside. But in classic Eric fashion, Cartman is only concerned if there is going to be a snow day, and there is. The game teases some story about this truck crash, but then immediately abandons it to focus on a generic fantasy plot, kind of like how Question Decider abandoned the 2D look of the previous games. Instead, the game is about the kids playing their Lord of the Rings / Game of Thrones ripoff and trying to figure out who casted a forbidden level 10 snowstorm spell that caused this blizzard. And I just want to say how much of a tongue twister it is for me to say snowstorm. I'm just going to blame that on my speech problem. That's pretty much the entire story. In between each matches, we get these quick cutscenes that is just pretty much summed up by saying, Oh, the last person we got wasn't the person who casted the spell, but the next guy probably is. And afterwards, we get a confrontation with the antagonist of the level, where we can choose what cards we want to play. These cards give us abilities to use. The only thing is we are only allowed to use 2, while the enemy can use anywhere between 2 to 6. Then there's the combat, and that is just boring. You sit there running around, spamming the attack button while cursing at your AI teammates who are dumber than butters. Seriously, if you do not have friends to play this game with, do not buy it. You know what? Actually, thinking about it, just don't play this game at all because it is not worth it. It is not worth the money, even if it is on sale. The few times that the game does try to embody the show, it just fails completely. Since the game was created during the Rona, we've got an ongoing joke about people hoarding toilet paper during this blizzard. It's not a funny moment, but it just makes you say,
I understood that reference.
the humor is just very dry and very safe. The jokes felt like they were created by a boardroom full of executives who ran them through a sort of corporate safety filter and not by Trey and Matt. Then there's the length of the game. Depending on the difficulty you play on, each chapter will take you around an hour to complete, with it taking roughly 5 hours to complete the game. Normally, I'd be mad at a game with such a short runtime, but in the case of Snow Day, I was grateful that I only had to spend 5 hours with it. When compared to the previous games, it's pretty obvious that Snow Day was just dog crap. But why was this? There are a few reasons why I believe South Park Snow Day failed. While we don't have confirmation about how hands-on Matt and Trey were with Snow Day, it feels like they took a more hands-off approach compared to the previous games. The writing feels devoid of their nothing is off-limits jokes. The duo did a lot of interviews about the previous games, stating how involved they were with the process, from writing the script to the animation. But when it came to Snow Day, they never seemed to talk as much. Instead, given answers that felt kind of scripted. They thought of the idea for Snow Day during the lockdown, so it just kind of seems like something the two did out of boredom rather than passion. This becomes clear in the voice acting. The characters don't even sound like the characters we know, rather just someone doing a poor imitation of them. The deliveries of their lines feel flat, and the game is flooded with moments that try too hard to be funny, and the jokes, they just don't feel like South Park at all. Snow Day also had a big change to how exploration worked. Unlike previous games where South Park was an open world that you could explore and pick up quests, Snow Day was instead area focused, with some areas not even looking like their counterparts in the show. This was all done, of course, for the sake of replayability, as each time you played a chapter, the levels would change. The only problem with this is that you need to make a game interesting enough to make people want to replay it, and South Park was as boring as a penny on a sidewalk. But here's the biggest red flag out of all of this. If you go to the developer's website, Question Games, and look at their portfolio, what do you see? You'll see the Magic Circle and the Blackout Club games. But do you see the biggest, most famous IP they worked on? South Park? No. South Park Snow Day is nowhere to be found on their website. You would think they would proudly display that they worked on a massive IP like South Park, but they don't. And that should tell you everything you need to know about this game. But Snow Day's failure might have just been another victim of the Rona. People were laid off or had to work from home, schools were shut down, and it just seemed like the very earth stopped moving. Because of this, Matt and Trey might not have had the opportunity to be as hands-on as they wanted with Snow Day. Of course, this is all speculation, it's just my opinion, it's why I think the game failed, and just that. But South Park Snow Day did ultimately fail because it abandoned the South Park identity. It tried to chase this roguelike trend that was popular during the Rona years, while abandoning everything that made the previous games great. Even if the South Park name wasn't attached to this game, it still would be a boring and bland experience. And I know the only reason I even picked this game up was because it was South Park. Do you think South Park can recover from this disaster? Or did Snow Day completely destroy any hopes for future games? Let me know in the comments. If you like this deep dive, why not check out the one on screen right now that goes over the real reason why Call of Duty World War II failed. Thanks for watching.